Hello, fellow Blazer fans. For Blazers Uprise, I'm Eric Brandt, and this is the first ever edition of Trade Talk Tuesdays. Now, it's also my first attempt at a solo video, so I hope you guys like it. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so below, and also turn on notifications so you get notices whenever we go live with a podcast, or a new video drops, or when Tori goes live with his post-game shows. For these trade videos, I'm not going to be talking about trading CJ, at least not initially. First of all, he can't be traded until January 30th. And second of all, I don't think it's realistic that he's going to be traded based on our situation. So I just don't want to waste a lot of time with CJ trade offers. If you guys want to post CJ trade ideas for later in the season, that's fine. But I probably won't address many of them unless there's some really interesting ones or it becomes apparent that it's a possibility he could be traded, but until that point, I'm just going to pretend like he's off the table. Now, in this particular episode, we're just going to talk about some players that have been rumored to be moved lately, what I'm hearing on the trade market, and stuff like that. For future episodes, I'd love to have your input on trade ideas. Please leave those in the comments below. We'll pick out a few good ones each week, and then we'll also have one or two bad ones each week to make fun of. So make sure you guys are being realistic with your trade offers and that they're even possible. Maybe run them through a trade machine. You can find me at Hoopsjock on Twitter, and Tori is at ToriJonesYT. And if you guys ever have any trade ideas or want to run anything by us before you post them out for the rest of the world to see, both of us are really good with the CBA and know our trade stuff, so you can always hit us up on Twitter. With the passing of that December 15th date, we now get into what's referred to as trade season. Really fun to talk about trades. You hear all kinds of rumors and stuff between now and the deadline. I love talking about trades. I love trying to figure out trades, whether it's for the Blazers or good trades for other teams, which we'll talk about too. And any trades that happen in the NBA, we'll of course analyze them, give our grades on them. I'm sure Tori will do the same. Today, I'd like to talk about three players in particular that I heard were possibly available. The first being Robert Covington. And also the Minnesota Timberwolves are apparently shopping Jeff Teague. It's no secret that they'd like a more long-term option at point guard. That's not something we can really provide for them, but we could get involved in a three-way trade that lands them, say, a D'Angelo Russell or a Chris Paul or any other number of players. I love the idea of trading Whiteside, and I'd even include a first-round pick for Robert Covington and Gorgui Dieng. Both of those guys are locked up. Covington still has 2 more years after this one. Gorgui Dieng has 1 more year after this one, so he'd be a good trade asset for next year as a big expiring contract. Plus, he'd also fill a role as either a backup big or the starting center if we trade Whiteside in that deal. I would give up Whiteside. I'd also give up a first-round pick. I know that seems like a lot, but I think Covington's worth it. It would basically solve our wing problem for the next couple years. We'd have Covington locked up, and then when Hood comes back and is healthy, that's a really good small forward rotation. Both of those guys can swing to other positions as well. Covington can play a little at the 4. Hood can play a little at the 2. I just really like the options that presents for us going forward if we want to move into a championship window. Dieng isn't the greatest offensive center, but he is a really solid defensive center. He'd be a nice backup to Nurk or whoever our center was at the time, and he'd be an okay stopgap. Not the greatest stopgap, but it would be worth it, in my opinion, to get a wing like Robert Covington who can guard multiple positions and really solve a lot of our defensive issues. I'm not sure what the Timberwolves are looking for in a trade for Covington. Obviously, like I said, they need a point guard. I don't know if they're looking to trade Covington straight up for a point guard. I heard some rumors about Dennis Schroeder being a possibility, but I know that Karl Anthony Towns is really good friends with D'Angelo Russell, and he's also good friends with Devin Booker. The three of them all want to play together. So I think if they made a move for D'Angelo Russell, it makes sense. Get 2 out of those 3 guys together and then try to find a way in the future to bring Booker into that equation. If the Golden State Warriors and the Minnesota Timberwolves were talking about a trade for swapping D'Angelo Russell, I would just slide Whiteside into that. So we'd have possibility of either just Whiteside going to Golden State along with a couple first round picks, probably at least 2 from Minnesota and 1 from us. And then you have Covington and Jang coming to us. And then you have D'Angelo Russell going to the Timberwolves. Or you could make it a little bigger trade where we got the same 2 players and Golden State got the same 2 picks, but they got Jeff Teague instead of Hassan Whiteside, and then Hassan Whiteside and D'Angelo Russell would go to the Minnesota Timberwolves. It doesn't really matter to me how it gets done as long as we end up with Covington and Jang. I really like that possibility. I would explore that before any of these other trades that we're going to suggest. Even though there's some bigger names possibly available, I think Covington really fits both what we need this year and would fit for future years as a really solid rotational piece. If the Timberwolves are interested in acquiring Chris Paul, I don't know why they would, but they seem like a team that might do something crazy like that. If that was a possibility, I think I would get involved with that, get the same 2 players, Covington and Jang, back, include a first-round pick to OKC. I think OKC, if they got Whiteside and the expiring of Jeff Teague as well, they would be thrilled to get out of Chris Paul's contract and get a first out of it. Covington, Teague, and Jang for Chris Paul. Despite taking on his contract, I think that's pretty fair value for Minnesota. They might actually have to give up like a second-round pick in there, maybe even to us. Something like Chris Paul and Andre Roberson's expiring deal going to the T-Wolves, us getting Covington and Jang, and the Thunder would get a first-round pick from us in 2020, Jeff Teague, and Hassan Whiteside. In all these scenarios, I definitely lottery protect the first-round pick as well. Sorry, I meant to say that earlier. I would not trade an unprotected first in this deal, nor would I trade an unprotected first in most scenarios. As a Blazer fan, the Covington and Jang trade has been one of my favorites since the preseason. I didn't think Covington would be available, so if he is, I would do everything possible to get him right now using one of our expiring contracts. Moving on to the next trade target, which would be Jrue Holiday. Now, I don't know if he necessarily fits. A lot of people are talking on Twitter, would you trade CJ straight up for Jrue? I would not do that, despite I think Jrue would be a good fit next to Dame, but I just don't like that type of move, like trading a guard for a guard on same contracts and all that stuff. Like, I don't think that move pushes us over the top. I don't know if there's a way to get Jrue Holiday to the Blazers without a big name like that going back to them. If a team like New Orleans was interested in adding a first-round pick and they were to take Bazemore and some salary filler or a Whiteside and a first-round pick for Jrue Holiday, and we solidified our guard rotation, I would definitely be in favor of that. But I don't know if that's something that New Orleans would like to do, and I don't know how feasible that is for the Blazers, especially considering how much they love Simons, even though he struggled this year. A move like that would push Simons out of the rotation, and that might be good temporarily or for a year or two, but if he's a future good player, I don't think they want to move him back to a situation where he's barely playing or not at all. And if that's the case, you might as well just trade him because you'd have 3 good guards locked up for a couple of years. So yeah, I'm not in love with scenarios for Jrue Holiday, but like I said, if we could get him for an expiring contract and a first-round pick, I definitely consider it because he would shore up our perimeter defense a little bit, much like I was saying with Covington. If Minnesota went after him, then we talk about the same trades we talked about for D'Angelo Russell and Chris Paul, where we could get back Gorgie Jang and Robert Covington. Keep coming back to that one because it's my favorite. And Hassan Whiteside and a first-round pick from both us and Minnesota, probably go back to New Orleans in that deal. I think that might be something that New Orleans will consider. They get an expiring contract and 2 firsts for getting rid of Jrue Holiday. I don't know what they're looking for in particular. They're kind of a weird team in that they are rebuilding, but they made a lot of weird signings like JJ Redick this summer. They traded for Derek Favors, almost like they were hoping to make a playoff push this year. And I know the Zion injury kind of affected that, so I don't know where they stand on what direction they're going. If it was me, I'd probably just go super young I'd let guys like Brandon Ingram, Jackson Hayes, and Zion, when he's healthy, be the future of your franchise and kind of move on from those older guys. But like I said, I'm not sure what they're doing. They said that they're not looking to trade J.J. Redick, which doesn't really make sense to me. He's got that big playoff streak going, and it's going to end this year if he doesn't get traded to a contender or a playoff team. The Pelicans have several pieces that they could get something of value for in return, and they're all kind of older guys, so I would definitely consider trading those guys if I was them. I'm just not sure where their mindset's at. The other big name that is said to be available is Myles Turner of the Indiana Pacers. Now, this is kind of a surprise. Apparently, they just can't make it work with him and Domantas Sabonis in the same front court. I don't know if that makes sense for us then to go after a Myles Turner. Myles Turner is a decent big. He's making $18 million a year for this year and then also the next 2 years. If he's having trouble matching up with Sabonis in the front court in Indiana, I don't know how his fit would be with Nurk and Collins here. So I probably wouldn't look into acquiring him, giving up too much, even though his value is probably pretty good around the league. I mean, if you could get him for a Bazemore in a first and maybe a Trent or one of the young guys, I would consider it for sure. But I just don't know where he fits in the rotation once Nurk's back. Of course, right now, it would be great to have a guy like Myles Turner in that rotation, but I just don't see that as a good possibility as trade partners here. We could always try to get involved as a third team in the deal, but a rumor I've been hearing is that Indiana is interested in Gallinari from the Thunder, and if that's the case, they could probably work out a deal that's pretty fair for both teams. Oklahoma City has that stockpile of picks. They could also do the Chris Paul trade I was talking about earlier and get another pick added to their collection. Maybe move a pick or two along with Gallinari to get Myles Turner back. And then they probably look to move on from Steven Adams at that point, but that would give them a pretty good young core with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Myles Turner. I like that move for both teams. The Pacers, since they lost Bogdanovich in the offseason, I think Gallinari fits on the Pacers and what they're looking for a little better than Turner, even though Turner probably has more value than Gallinari. And now on to a rumor I was hearing a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to figure out a way for the Blazers to get involved with it, and that is that the Charlotte Hornets are very interested in acquiring Andre Drummond. Now, they think Andre Drummond would be a good fit long-term next to Terry Rozier, and now Devontae Graham stepping up. Originally, I was thinking that they could use Graham as a trade piece to try and get Drummond, especially since the Pistons could use a point guard like him. But I think his value is growing too much to where I don't know if it'd be worth it for them. Drummond does have a player option this summer, which he has already said he was going to decline and try to get a bigger contract. Now, I don't know if he'd be interested in re-signing in Charlotte. That's probably something they'd have to figure out before he was traded there, because if I'm Charlotte, I wouldn't give up a lot if you didn't have a chance to re-sign him, obviously. Now, if you think Charlotte is interested in Drummond, could they possibly be interested in Whiteside? It's a little different situation since Whiteside is 30 years old. Drummond is only 26, so Drummond kind of fits better as a rebuilding center. Also, he's a good enough center to where he could be on a contending team as well. So he kind of fits both windows. Personally, I wouldn't risk him bouncing in the offseason, but if you can work it out with his agent that he's planning on re-signing with you over the summer, I guess it would be okay. But I could see the Charlotte Hornets or a team like that taking a risk. If a Drummond was moved to a team like Charlotte, to me that would signify much bigger news, and that would be that Detroit is possibly becoming sellers and rebuilding themselves. Between Detroit struggling this year and Blake Griffin being in and out of the lineup with a knee injury, I think that's a guy that we can get at a super low cost right now. Probably only have to give up expirings and maybe one first-round pick, and I think that gets a deal done with that situation right now. I can't see Detroit holding on or believing that they have much of a future with Drummond and Blake Griffin. So I expect them to be sellers at some point, and I don't think there's a lot of teams that will compete to try and get a Blake Griffin. So the risk is just big, but At some point, if the Blazers are going to take the next step, they're going to have to take a big risk like that. Blake Griffin is super risky due to his knee injuries, but he's a really good player when he's on the court. His stats this year aren't great, but like I said, when you're in and out of the lineup, it's really hard to be consistent. So he hasn't really been able to practice or play a lot. So hopefully it's just a downtick. He is 31 years old and has a monster contract. But if you gave up minimal assets, like I said, to get him, I would be all for that. So I have a couple of ideas here. One would be to get both Blake Griffin and Tony Snell from the Pistons. Now, Tony Snell isn't a great player. He's got another year after this one at about $11 million, I believe, on his contract. The value there is just adding another wing that's capable of helping us out this year. And then we could trade him as an expiring contract the following year. In this particular trade, the Hornets would end up with both Andre Drummond and Langston Galloway just to make the money work out. The Pistons hit the total reset button, end up with 4 expiring contracts: Hassan Whiteside, Kent Bazemore, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and Marvin Williams. I think the rebuild would be off to a really nice start with drafting Doumbia and Servetus last year. The Pistons' own pick this year would be very high in the lottery after trading both Griffin and Drummond. And then they'd also have 2 additional first-round picks. So I think that would be a really nice jump start for them, despite having to give up the 2 best players in the trade. Any trades involving Whiteside or Bazemore, you have to worry about the small forward position, especially with Hood being out, and the center position with Nurk still not ready. Snell would be the temporary replacement for Bazemore in this deal for the Blazers. That's what's important about having an extra roster spot and also getting that disabled player exception for Rodney Hood. So you'd have to make another signing or trade to fill in some holes, especially if we traded Whiteside for Blake Griffin. That pretty much leaves us without a true center on the roster until Nurk gets back. Instead of covering our small forward hole with Tony Snell, you could also rearrange the deal to where we got back Blake Griffin and Bismack Biyombo, who's on a big expiring contract. Don't love the idea of getting Biyombo, but he'd just be a temporary stopgap at a center position. From the Blazers' point of view, there's several expiring contracts. You got Marvin Williams, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Langston Galloway, Bismack Biyombo. There's a lot of interchangeable parts into this trade that you could try to work out depending on what you thought you needed. I was trying to find a way to get Marvin Williams earlier in the season because I think he'd be a nice temporary stopgap as well. But since we added Carmelo, I think adding another guy at that position isn't as high priority as small forward and center. But yeah, as for now, I'm not as high on getting Blake Griffin as I was earlier in the season. I'd probably still be okay with trading for him, just not as gung-ho about it as I was before. The Blazers were granted that disabled player exception for Rodney Hood, which means they can either trade for or sign a player up to $2.86 million. If we use the exception to acquire a player, it has to either be a free agent that signs for only the remainder of this season or is in the last year of their current contract. There's 2 guys that I would call their teams and inquire about. One is Malik Beasley of the Denver Nuggets, and the other is Dylan Brooks of the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, both of those guys could help our wing situation, our small forward situation right now. If it wasn't too costly to get either of those guys, I would definitely pursue those avenues first. My guess is that both of those teams are pretty high on those guys, even though Beasley's not in the rotation right now. I don't think they're just going to give him away. I would definitely take him if they were interested in doing that. I probably wouldn't give up a first-round pick for either one, considering they're both free agents this summer. Even though they're restricted free agents, you'd have to sign them to a pretty big contract most likely. So I wouldn't want to take that risk this summer, but definitely call those guys first. The most logical trade partner right now is the Golden State Warriors. I've heard rumors that they want to make Kai Bowman a full-time contract. After being a 2-way player, they've almost used up his time, so they want to convert him to their 15-man roster. But to do so, they have some issues because they not only don't have a roster spot available, but they're up against the hard cap due to the sign and trade for D'Angelo Russell. The Blazers could call, say, hey, we have this disabled player exception. We'll take one of these guys for you. It helps you clear up a roster spot. You can convert Kai Bowman then to the 15-man roster, and we benefit because we get a wing that could help us right now. The Warriors are trying to tank this season, so it doesn't really matter to them. I would assume that a second-round pick would definitely get that deal done. If they get desperate enough to get that little bit of cushion away from the hard cap, then I think we maybe get something done for just the rights to a foreign player that would never play over here, like the one we acquired in the Jake Layman trade over the summer, or even just like a protected future second-round pick. So what are your guys' thoughts? What do you think of my trade ideas? What do you want to see happen? How fast do you want to see that happen? Please comment below. It's been a fun, good learning experience for me. Hope you guys enjoyed it. For Blazers Uprise, I'm Eric Brandt. Peace out. Go Blazers.